Thank you for joining us for our first webinar of the 2012 Georgia Chamber Webinar Series. My name is Rebecca Jones, and I'm our Director of Member Services and Programs here at the Chamber. I'm glad all of y'all chose to join us. I first would like to thank our presenting sponsor of the 2012 Webinar Series. They are Alliant Health Plans. So with their support, we are able to provide more programming like this. So we appreciate their support of this new program. Today's webinar is the top 10 most common branding mistakes that companies both large and small tend to make. So we are in for a treat. Deborah has a great presentation filled with examples and humor, and I think we will all leave with a better understanding of how we can help define our brand and also avoid these mistakes. So I know it will be a very educational experience for all of us. Deborah Siemens is a veteran marketing researcher and a nationally recognized expert on brand positioning and strategy. She works for Polaris Marketing Research and has overall responsibility for their client relationships, project satisfaction, and in addition to marketing efforts, helps build strategic alliances for their services as well. Prior to joining Polaris, she was a marketing consultant, worked at the brand consultancy, also in market development for both Carlson Wagonlit Travel as well as Holiday Inn Worldwide and Bell South. So a lot of different good corporate experience that she can share with us. She is also an instructor in marketing management, internal branding, and nonprofit marketing for the American Marketing Association. Deborah received her Master's of Business Administration from Georgia State University and a bachelor's degree from the State University of New York. So without further ado, Deborah, I'm going to give everything over to you.
Okay. So I believe you can see my screen now, and I just want to say I'm delighted to be here with you today and talking about the top 10 branding mistakes that companies make and that hopefully after this hour you'll be able to avoid. So let's start a little bit about talking about what is a brand. There's a lot of confusion about this, and part of the reason I believe is that the business schools like Georgia State have not taken the lead in defining branding for us. You know, we know about advertising, we know about marketing communications, we know about a lot of things, marketing research, but branding has never been really defined by the academics. So what they've done is they've left it up to us. So, and in true form, we as marketers have done our own thing. So sometimes you see a brand referred to as a symbol, sometimes a set of expectation, a promise of benefits. I've even seen it referred to as a trademark at times. All of these are part of your brand, but they're not the sum total of your brand. This is, I think, a really good, although a little bit heavy-handed, definition of brand. So a brand is a proprietary visual, emotional, rational, and cultural image that you associate with a company or product. So I want you to do something for me now, and that is to think about a brand that you are very loyal to. And then think about why you're loyal to it. What does it do for you? How does it benefit you? Think about what would get you to switch. What if you could get another brand for less money, perhaps? Think about all those things, and then let's go back to this definition. So a brand is a proprietary, visual, emotional, rational, and cultural. So start with proprietary. It's proprietary to you. So the brands you're talking about, the ones you're loyal to, or thinking about rather, the ones you're loyal to are proprietary to their owners. There's nothing else like them. And because of that, they really should be very careful about them. They're visual, so they are your imagery, your logo, the pictures you show. They're emotional, so it's not just what do you do for me, but how do I feel about it? So, you know, when you were thinking about the brands that you're loyal to, I'm sure that some of the emotions that came up were very strong. You certainly maybe even have a passion about that brand. For example, I use Tide laundry detergent. I use it because my mom used it. That's all. There's no other reason. So, you know, so for me, that's a very emotional thing. But brands are also rational in that, you know, Tide has to get my clothes clean. And so we have rational things that we're looking for. So very, what I call sort of more like the hard benefits of the brand. It's cultural as well in that when I use a certain brand, I'm saying something about myself to the rest of the world. I'm telling you where I fit in. If I drive a BMW, a PT Cruiser, a Mini Cooper, or a truck, they'll say something different about me and how I see myself in our culture. So think about all of those things and think about how your company, especially as a small company, how those things might apply to you. So I know what you're thinking. We were already totally over your head. I'm not Coca-Cola. I don't have a gazillion-dollar marketing budget. Why should I care about this? And the reason is because even small companies have brands. If you have a customer, you have a brand. And so you'd better be thinking about it and worried about it. Here's some other things. Brands bring great benefits to companies. First of all, you can get your customers to do your marketing for you. So I love this quote. A brand is indisputably strong when its customers tattoo themselves with its logo, from Harley Davidson, of course. Jennifer Barron, How Brands Get on Intent and Stay There, great quote from her. But not all of us are going to have our customers tattooing themselves with our logo. So what else do we do? How else do we get customers to do our marketing? They tell other people about us. They refer, right? And that's part of having a strong brand, is having that connection, that relationship with your customers, that they'll feel comfortable that if they refer you, you'll treat their friends and neighbors or their colleagues just like you treat them. People pay $15 to see Coke's ads. Now, you may never get to the point where people are going to pay for your advertising or to view your advertising, but I mean, what an amazing thing for a brand to be able to actually charge people to come in and look at their advertising. Brands can differentiate a commodity. Here's another example of Sunkist. An orange is an orange is an orange, unless, of course, that orange happens to be a Sunkist, a name 80% of consumers know and trust. Brands become a shorthand of quality, of purpose, of benefit, that then allows consumers to choose you. So even if you're in a commodity market, your brand can differentiate your product. Brands let you charge more. It's called brand equity. It lets Starbucks charge a premium for coffee and for water and for just about everything else they sell. So this is an experiment I did last year. I'm sure the prices have gone up. But I went into Starbucks and ordered a medium latte, which was $3.85. I came out, crossed the street to the Dunkin' Donuts and ordered a medium latte, and it was $3.27. That's quite a lot of brand equity there. So if you have a very strong brand that people prefer, then you'll be able to raise your prices. Now, maybe not this much, but certainly a little bit. And brands help you grow. Once you have a strong brand in one category, you can use that to leverage your growth into other categories, other channels. It gives you a premium or a volume advantage and a price premium for every new product. So let's move on to the top 10 branding mistakes. I hope I've convinced you that this is definitely something you should be thinking about. Okay, first one is losing control of your brand. And this happens more, I think, in large companies, but it also happens in small companies. Small companies have the advantage of, frankly, being small. There's fewer people that have their finger in the brand pie. So I think it's a little bit easier for you guys to keep control of your brand. But think about how many people are working on your brand or expressing your brand. Perhaps you have a web development firm. Perhaps you have a graphic designer. Perhaps you have a copywriter working on your printed materials. You certainly have employees who are talking to customers, either inside or outside, or perhaps both. You may have partners. You may have associate companies that you work with. All of those people are involved in expressing your brand. And if you're not managing them all and sort of keeping an eye on the big picture, then that could be a vulnerability for you. Losing control of your brand, in large companies, it's usually the ad agency. You know, they lose control of their brand to the ad agency. With small companies, it's more that there's so many people involved in it, and everybody's doing their own thing, that you lose control of your brand that way. So this does not mean that you have to do everything. You do not have to be the web developer, the copywriter, the graphic designer, but you do have to be the overseer. You have to have the big picture in mind because nobody else does. Okay. So well-managed brands live on, only bad brand managers die. So that's what happens if you lose your brand or lose control of your brand. Brand mistake number 2, not establishing a differentiation. This is by far the most common of all of these mistakes. And I do need to mention to you that they're not in any particular order. If I wanted to rank them by the worst to the least, this would be the worst. And this happens in all sized companies. Part of it is that to establish a differentiation, it means you have to say no to some things, and we're not good at that. So if I'm going to be known as the company that does X best, then that means I can't be the company that does Y best. So, and that's hard for us sometimes because, especially as small businesses, it's hard to say no. Another problem is that in today's world, it's really hard to keep a differentiation. So one of the things that we've done to adapt this is to think about it not just as differentiation, but as distinction. So you stand out from the crowd. Now, let's say you paint houses. Well, all of you use certain kinds of paint. All of you have certain kinds of promises, but you stand out from the crowd on maybe leaving the house cleanest when you're done, or the ground's all picked up and clean. You have to pick something and stand out on it, something that's important to your target audience. So here's an explanation of differentiation, the one thing. Do you remember the movie City Slickers? Grizzled cowboy Jack Palance asks soul-searching Billy Crystal, do you know what the secret to life is? And Billy, of course, says, no, what? One thing, just one thing. You stick to that and everything else don't mean shit. And Billy Crystal says, that's great, but what's the one thing? And Palance says, that's what you've got to figure out. And so that's what I say to you. You've got to figure out what's the one thing that you're going to stand out from the crowd on. Now, another problem with this is that we don't like to be limited to one thing, as I said before. So what happens when you're good at something is people start to associate that you're good with other things. So let's take a look at Volvo. Volvo is a safe car. Are they also well engineered? Yes. Do they also hold their value? Yes. So just because they're known as the safe car doesn't mean that we don't give them credit for other positive things. Brand mistake number 3, managing your brand with benign neglect. And this is sort of, I just don't even think about my brand. I never give it a thought. I didn't even realize that I had a brand before today, that sort of thing. So you're just you're not hurting it, but you're not strengthening it either. So think about the things that you manage. You manage your money, people, time, facilities, operations, your capital assets, and probably a dozen or 24 more things. How much time do you spend managing your brand? Now, obviously the first rule is don't hurt your brand, but if you're not working to strengthen your brand, then every day that passes you become a little more vulnerable to losing your brand equity. So you have to actively manage your brand. Brand mistake number 4, not defining your target market. I'm going to move to the next slide because it kind of says everything. A brand that is all things for all people ends up being nothing for anyone. You have to have a target audience. Now, what is the target audience? The target audience is simply the audience that you're going to target your communications to. So does that mean that if I'm targeting my product to college-age women, does that mean that I don't let college-age men in the door? No, of course not. It just means that I'm going to use messaging, imagery, and channels that are really focused on college-age women. I had a client once that was a grocery store. It was kind of a high-end grocery store. And so we told them that they should go after college-educated mothers because they were the most likely to shop there. And so the owner, who is a kind of an older gentleman, got very upset, very upset. And we couldn't understand why he was so upset about college-educated moms. And it turned out that I think he really thought we were advocating putting a sign in the front door that said, you know, no men allowed. That's not the case. It just helps you target and focus the money you're spending on communication. That's what your target audience is all about. So brand mistake number 5, not aligning what you promise with what you deliver. And this happens a lot with companies of all sizes. Every time you make a promise that you don't deliver on, you erode your brand. And most brands can't stand very much erosion before they're pretty much used up. So that is definitely one thing. Figure out what your differentiation is, which is also your brand promise, right? I'm the best at X. And then make sure that you deliver that at every customer touch point. No one goes to a restaurant because it promises great food. They go there because it serves great food. Weak brands promise, great brands deliver. I don't know who said this, but it is absolutely true, and you know it yourself. You know, if you see an advertisement that says, we're going to give you the best customer service you've ever had, and then you patronize that company and you don't get the best customer service you've ever had, you probably aren't going to go back another time. So brand mistake number 6, not making branding everyone's responsibility. What do I mean by this? It's not just about marketing. It's about everyone, executives, employees, partners, distribution channels, and your customers. Use everyone to express your brand. Get everyone on board. Make sure they understand first what your brand is, what your distinction, your differentiation is, and what your target audience is, who your target audience is. And make sure that they understand what that means for their jobs if they're employees, or for their relationships if they're partners in distribution channels. Okay? The reason is that they can influence your delivery. Let me think of an example here that really was really challenging, and that was for a credit card company. One of the really key touch points was at the merchant. And the merchant, especially when the card was denied, how should the merchant handle your customer, if you're a credit card company, when you've denied their charge? You know, I mean, it's a very sensitive situation. It's potentially embarrassing to the customer. So, you know, the problem is that, you know, you don't own that channel. You don't own the person, the clerk in the restaurant or the retail place or whatever, who's doing the denying or who's communicating the denying. So, you know, thinking about that and managing that situation as much as possible could be a real brand touch point that could then be turned into a positive. Brand mistake number 7, changing too much and too often. It's true that we get bored and tired of the stuff we're doing much sooner than the marketplace does. And that's one of the problems, is that, you know, you see companies that, you know, come out with a new direction, a new program, a new promise just too often. Find something that works, stick with it until it stops working. It'll save you a lot of money, and it will be much more effective because, you know, people will have a chance to learn about it, learn to like it, and get used to it. So changing too much and too often is a real problem for a lot of companies. And I have seen many, many companies change their direction, their positioning, their imagery just too often so that nothing ever sticks. Longevity builds brands. How long have the Chick-fil-A cows been around? I don't even know. And I'm sure the people at Chick-fil-A in the marketing department are getting kind of tired of those old cows. But they would be terribly foolish not to stick with them because they work. And the public isn't getting them. I'm sure they're doing research to find out whether the public's getting tired of them yet. But until the public gets tired of them, they will stick with those cows. Nike is another one. you know, how long have they been using this symbol? I think since the 70s, perhaps, a long time. And yet it works. It says Nike. You don't even need the word. McDonald's, right? Ronald McDonald promises your kids a fun time while they're at McDonald's. What could be better than that? And Tiffany's blue box. How long have they been doing that? It's gotten to the point where they even use the blue box as jewelry. You can buy a charm for your charm bracelet. You can buy a pin that looks like the blue box. So this has really taken off for them, obviously. Something I want to talk about, though, is a lot of these are symbols, right? You eat more chicken with the cow. You see the cow, you think Chick-fil-A. They don't have to say Chick-fil-A. So you see the blue box, you think Tiffany's, or your wife does if you don't. So, you know, you see the swoosh, you think Nike. So symbols are a really great way to express your brand without using your brand name. And what does that do for you? It gives you flexibility in the imagery that you use and in your communications. And it can save you money, too, depending on how long your name is and how well it communicates. But it does take time. You just can't come out with a swoosh tomorrow and say, okay, this is our swoosh. Now everybody knows who we are. No, they're going to think you're Nike. And Nike's probably going to think you're Nike, you're copying Nike. So you probably don't want to do that. But developing a symbol that stands for your company over time is a great thing to do. But it does take a lot of consistency and time because people, you know, much as they love you, you're not top of mind to them. And it's going to take them a while to learn that symbol so you don't have to use your brand name all the time. Brand mistake number 8, over-branding. So what do I mean by over-branding? And that happens more in larger companies, but it happens in small companies as well. I've seen it where everything's branded. Everything is a name. Everything has a logo. Everything's branded. And, you know, the bottom line is every time you create a brand, it costs you money. So you may not want to have too many brands. You may want to create one brand and then leverage that over other products, over other services. So let's take a look at brand architecture for a minute. You need to understand how your brand is structured and how it works in the marketplace.
Deborah? Looks like we might be having some technical difficulties. Give us just a second here. I apologize for the delay. Give us just a second here. We're getting Deborah reconnected.
But now we're back. That's good. So your brand architecture. We talked over branding. I'm not sure exactly where you lost audio, but the problem with over branding is that every time you create a brand, it costs you money. So you want to be very careful when you're introducing new products, have as much as possible, and to not constantly create new brands. What we have entering it. So this is a basic brand architecture schema that's pretty commonly used in marketing. The branded house is the brand where basically everything's built off one brand. So when you think of GE and you realize that they have GE locomotives, GE, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all branded under GE, that's a branded house. There are lots of other examples of branded houses. Now this is the most efficient because everything you do, every penny you spend, builds that GE brand. Then we have sub-brands, which are also still associated with the main brand, endorsed brands, which are still associated but less so, and then finally house of brands where there's absolutely no relationship at all. You decide how to brand is what's your target audience, product or service to the same target audience that you've always addressed, then you might not need a new brand. You might be able to leverage your old brand. So maybe instead of XYZ paint, you have XYZ interior paint, XYZ exterior paint, something like that. If you are going after a new target audience that you've never used before, then the question becomes, how will they relate to your brand, to your existing brand? If they're good with it, use it. You don't have to create a new brand to go after a new target audience. Now, if your brand is old and stodgy and traditional, not stodgy, old, traditional, staid, that kind of conservative, all those words, it's sort of a more, it's not a hip brand, and you're going after a hip new target audience, then you're probably going to need a new brand. And sometimes we go so far as to never, ever, ever let the audience know that we're supporting that brand. There's McDonald's owns a lot of nice mid-scale restaurants that you might be surprised to learn are McDonald's. They're not McDonald's, of course. They're a different brand, but they're owned by McDonald's. So, that happens a lot. And sometimes you can leverage your brand, and sometimes it's better not to. But it's the decision that you should make very thoughtfully, and not just for not just because you're bored or because somebody likes this name. I was in a company once where we gave products in development, we gave them code names. And I was working on one called Cracker Jack, and this was a technology product. And the team really got quite fond of that name. And unfortunately, Cracker Jack is very strongly, first of all, it's owned by somebody else, which was a big problem, but it's also very strongly associated with a surprise in every box, which for a technology product probably would not have been a good idea. So, just because they love that name wasn't a reason to use it as the product name. In fact, we came out with a sub-brand that leveraged one of our existing brands. So mistake number 9, not taking the customer's perspective. This is sort of one of my pet peeves, and it's pretty common as well. Your brand resides in the head of your customer, in the mind of your customer, and hopefully in the heart of your customer as well. And so you need to understand what they're thinking and what they're thinking about your brand. It doesn't really matter what you think, what your wife thinks, what your CFO thinks. It only matters what your customers think. and your prospective customers too, of course. So that is really critical. Here's another quote from Harley Davidson. The more you engage with customers, the clearer things become and the easier it is to determine what you should be doing. When you talk to your customers, a lot of your preconceived notions go away. I had a wonderful experience with a home builder up in Maryland, and we did research for them, and we came back and we said, this is what your customers think. And the CEO started laughing, and I was kind of taken aback because I didn't think it was really that funny. But he said, we've been fighting over that for 6 years. He said, we almost came to blows at a Christmas party once because we disagreed about that so vociferously. And he said, you know, we should have done this research 6 years ago. It would have saved us a lot of time arguing about stuff. And that's really the key. You know, you need to understand what your customer thinks. They're the only ones that really matter. And nowadays, with the tools that we have available, it's pretty easy to do marketing research at a very reasonable price. So there's really no excuse not to ask your customers what they think. Brand mistake number 10, stepping outside your brand space. So let me first define what I mean by brand space. And that is sort of the sphere of influence that your brand can occupy. All brands have a range of opportunities, of potential that they can live in. And when you step outside that, you're violating your brand space, and that's where you get into trouble. So let's talk a little bit about some of the companies that have stepped outside their brand space. Levi's men's suits. Levi Strauss, the jeans company, decided that they weren't in the jeans business or the denim clothing business or the casual clothing business. They were in the men's clothing business. And so they introduced a line of suits. Failed miserably because they stepped outside their brand space. They weren't in the men's clothing business. They were in the casual clothing business. And so they came back and introduced Dockers, which, of course, was a tremendous success. They don't even call it Dockers by Levi anymore. They're just Dockers. And something like 70% of all U.S. males have a pair of Dockers in their closet. And now they've come out with a more upscale line of Dockers that they call Slate. So clearly they started to understand what business they were in by talking to their customers. How about another one? Gerber Adult Foods. I can hardly say that without shuddering. But Gerber, the baby food company, found out that college students were eating baby food as snacks. So they were tending to eat the really, really sugary dessert or fruit baby foods as just quick snacks. So Gerber decided that, well, if a college student likes them, they would introduce a line of adult foods. Failed miserably. Gerber cannot be used with a target audience of anyone over 3. So they found out that that was outside of their brand space, and they backed off. Finally, we're in Georgia, so we have to talk a little bit about New Coke, which also was a problem. Now, you know, they didn't step outside of their brand space, but they did violate the trust that people had in the brand, which is just the same thing as stepping out of the brand space. You have to know what people will allow you to do. We did a survey for another credit card company that was very interesting because they said, you know, we're all the same. We all have this interest rate. We all, you know, go to a lot of merchants. We all have the same thing. How are we different? And we did some marketing research, and we found out that the personality of the cards was very, very different. American Express is not the same as MasterCard, even though they function the same and deliver the same benefits to their audience. So again, you know, what is the brand space of that company? And it really is directed a little bit to their target audience and what the target audience thinks of them. At the same time, we were looking at whether this credit card could go into some new markets. And it really turned out that our client had a very broad permission from the target audience. Not only could they be a credit card, they could really do anything in terms of information, which was much, much broader than they had been thinking. They really thought maybe if they could just do like insurance, that would be good. But they actually were able to move into some really interesting information products. So that's what happens when you violate your brand space. Not good things at all. All right, so those are the top 10 branding mistakes, and hopefully I've given you a little bit of insight into how to find them and avoid them. And now what I want to talk about is the beauty part. The good news is it usually doesn't cost any more to do branding right than to make these 10 mistakes. We're not talking about allocating more resources. We're talking about gaining greater efficiency by focusing on your brand and by doing it right. So, don't think that you have to spend a lot of money to improve your brand. You really just have to do things differently. So in summary, I want to give you this quote from David Ogilvy. Any damn fool can put on a deal, but it takes genius, faith, and perseverance to create a brand. I think that's a great quote, but I want to take a little bit of liberty with it, and I want to take out the genius and just say it's hard work. You don't have to be a genius. You just have to be hard. You have to work hard to be consistent and to stay focused and to manage your brand appropriately. So I have time for some questions, if you would like. I don't see any questions in here.
On the right-hand side of everyone's screen in the kind of go to meeting box, there is a part where you can type in a question. So if there's something that kind of jogs your intrigue during the presentation, feel free to take a second to type something over there. So we'll give folks just a minute here, Deborah.
Okay. While we're waiting for questions, I was thinking about a talk I did for a small business group a few weeks ago before Christmas, and one of the questions was about symbols and mascots and whether that's a good thing for a small business. And it was an interesting discussion. I think anytime you can find something that represents your brand without it saying, Joe's Plumbing, I think that's a good thing. But I would give you the caveat that that symbol or that mascot has to have some relationship to the core benefit that you're delivering, to your differentiation, to your brand promise, whatever you want to call it. Let me give you an example. The Chick-fil-A cows are obviously a great symbol for Chick-fil-A. They relate directly to eating chicken, right? Because if I'm a cow, I don't want you to eat hamburgers, I want you to eat chicken. So it's perfect. Aflac, on the other hand, has kind of struggled. Their duck is beloved, and everyone's crazy about it, but nobody really understood for a long time how the duck, other than sounding like a quack when you say Aflac, how the duck related to the product that Aflac is selling. Combine that with the fact that not a lot of people knew what that product was and were unfamiliar with it, and that created kind of a perfect storm for them. People knew the duck, but they weren't buying the product. So they've done a lot of work over the last few years addressing that problem, where making their advertising more about what is our product and what do we do for you, what benefit do you get, why you should buy us, and less about the duck itself, and really using the duck more as an exclamation point, if you will. So that's something else I was thinking about when I this morning when I was thinking about this webinar, was mentioning to you, symbols are great and really beneficial in terms of communication, but do yourself a favor and make sure it applies to your business, that it communicates what you want it to communicate so you don't have to work so hard.
Wonderful. Well, it doesn't look like anyone had typed anything at this point, so Deborah has been kind enough to put up her information here on the last page of the slide, so she welcomes you to reach out afterwards if anything else comes to mind. In addition, you will receive an email from me either later today or tomorrow morning that will have a link to download these slides for yourself as well as a short survey. So we would value your feedback to help us improve upon our webinars as we move forward. So I know everyone will join with me, Deborah, and thank you for your time today and for the educational experience that you provided for all of us. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we hope you will tune in for our next one.